Welcome, everyone. I first saw Daniel speak on the main stage at the TED conference in February 2009, and his TED Talk is available. I encourage you to look at it. He talked about his invention, the marrow miner. Daniel's a Stanford and Harvard trained physician, scientist, inventor, entrepreneur, and innovator. He has over 20 years of experience in clinical practice, biomedical research, and healthcare innovation. He chairs the medicine track for Singularity University and is executive director for FutureMed, a program which explores convergent, exponentially developing technologies and their potential in biomedicine and healthcare. Dr. Kraft recently founded Internal Medicine, focused on enabling connected, data-driven, and integrated personalized medicine. He's also the inventor of the marrow miner, an FDA-approved device for the minimally invasive harvest of bone marrow, and he founded RegenMed Systems, a company developing technologies to enable adult stem cell-based regenerative therapies. David is also an avid pilot and serves in the California Air National Guard as an officer and flight surgeon with an F-16 fighter squadron. He has conducted research on aerospace medicine that was published with NASA, with whom he was a finalist for astronaut selection. JHTC, it pleases me to introduce you to Daniel Kraft.
Thank you, Gordon, and thanks JHTC and everyone for coming tonight. It's an honor to be here. I am asking which time zone I'm in because I literally arrived from Dubai about 6 hours ago. So it's an interesting, small, connected world now, and I think what we'll talk about this evening is a little bit about where health and medicine is heading through technology and beyond. Just to get a flavor, how many folks here have anything to do with health and medicine in any sort of way? Wow. Any doctors? Two. Okay, I'm in trouble. All right. We can make this interactive, so jump in as we go. I'm going to try and cover a lot of elements in about 30 minutes, and then we can kind of have a discussion. So, just a little framing. I literally was in Dubai yesterday speaking to the leader of Dubai and the cabinet of UAE, which was quite it's an amazing place. You've been there. She was there a couple years ago. Thanks also to my friend Adrian, who's here, who was one of the only Western women to raise camels. And you should meet her later and ask about that. I think the screen's a bit cut off, but amazing place. But what was more incredible was a week before that, I was in Tel Aviv, and I spoke at a conference there on innovations in cardiology. So to be with a bunch of sheiks on one Monday and a week before to be in Tel Aviv and back here within 24 hours is a little trippy. So if I start to get jet lag, let me know. So I thought, before we sort of look into the future of medicine, it's a little bit useful to take a look as to where we are now, or sort of back to the future, and how medicine is sort of practiced today. And I went to medical school, came to Hotel California in the 90s to go to Stanford for medical school, and then I was lucky to go to Boston for residency in both internal medicine and pediatrics, and I had a chance to go back there about 2 years ago exactly for the 200th anniversary of MGH. It was a big deal because it's one of the oldest hospitals in the U.S. Got to have a reunion with the folks I trained with. There I am. There I am back in the day. And this is before, of course, they had these 80-hour work week restrictions that we have for doctors today. And for those of you who've been to Boston, we can make up stories about walking uphill both ways in the snow and all sorts of elements like that. But what was interesting is I found myself, after one of the receptions, one of the most famous spots of healthcare history. This is called the Aether Dome. Anyone know why it's called Aether Dome? Any anesthesiologists here? It's a hint. Well, in 1846, this lucky patient, that's the real guy, was the first patient to get general anesthesia with a surgery. Before that, they literally bit the bullet. And if you go back to the Aether Dome today, you can literally see the actual sponge that the ether was in. I mean, I think this predates the FDA, but you can still see the actual sponge, no HIPAA compliance rules. And the Aether Dome was kind of frozen in time. We'd have some special grand rounds there and, morbidity, mortality rounds and special ceremonies, but it's frozen in time, hasn't changed much since this portrait was taken at the time they did the surgery. So, healthcare shrine. I wandered literally 4 minutes down the hall to the ward where I spent my first month as a brand new intern in the mid-90s, and to my shock and dismay, that was also frozen in time. It really hadn't changed much since the mid-90s. Some of the same alarms were beeping, so it's PTSD, some of the same nurses, some of the same patients maybe, and the only difference was the poor intern was pushing around a cart with probably a 1999 Circa laptop and had to print off the electronic medical record and put it in a paper chart. And the front desk there is still faxing orders back and forth to the pharmacy. I'm like, this is man's greatest hospital, right? And my sort of aha moment was that,
Some of them are still doing that.
oh yeah, well, some. I mean, I was there 2 months ago. We're doing medicine by fax machine, come on, right? And so the kind of takeaway is that medicine's still in many ways being practiced like it has been since 1846. Lots of silos of healthcare, a lot of things sort of based upon department and fiefdoms and, protecting information. And, we're now in this connected health age, this mobile age, this digital health age, and maybe we don't need to be spending 3 hours waiting in a waiting room for a 10-minute visit. Maybe we can think about reinventing healthcare in new ways beyond sort of the old definitions by body part and by ologies per se. So it's an interesting era because we're in this transition between, I think, old school medicine and this new era, which of course has growing pains and challenges because there's a lot of problems in health and medicine, whether you're in Dubai, Tel Aviv, or here, right? So we have the 18% of our GDP that goes to healthcare today, which is bankrupting our country, particularly with the aging demographic, 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. Access to care, whether you're in Eilat or Dubai or even in East Palo Alto, there's issues with access to care, and no matter what you think about Obamacare, we have a lot more folks who should be getting coverage, but a huge primary care physician shortage in general, right? It's cut off here a bit, but variation in clinical practice. Why do we take the same exact disease or problem and treat it differently at Stanford or at Mass General or at Rambam? Other challenges are, we're in this era of big data, lots of information coming at us, now as patients, as physicians, as payers, but how do we make that big information? It's still a lot of fragmented information. How many times have you filled out the same form with the number 2 pencil asking you about your allergies and asking you, the same information is not captured well, very fragmented. A lot of it's still captured in paper charts. And that means that there's a lot of duplication and waste. So about 30% of our healthcare dollar kind of goes to our friends, the insurers, and people who just process forms. So a lot of room for improvement there. But even though a lot of the technologies I have in my pockets and I'll show you tonight are here, the bigger challenge sometimes is who pays for it, the payers, and who regulates it, our friends at the FDA who aren't keeping up necessarily with technology and still have old models. So that's a little bit of framing. One other piece of framing I'll mention is that, we really as a society still practice sick care, not really health care. We're spending most of our dollars once you've gotten sick, not on preventing illness. And that is no surprise because that's where the incentives lie. So let's look with my screen here. But essentially, we're spending about 80% of our healthcare dollars on the 20% of the sick patients with chronic disease. We practice evidence reimbursement-based medicine instead of evidence-based medicine. And with that sick care model, as a physician, the folks who are docs, most of us get paid by seeing patients fee for service, putting in the stent, doing the biopsy, not for keeping folks well or for outcomes. But that's starting to shift with the new accountable care models, ACOs, with value-based outcomes, with groups like Kaiser and others, where the incentives are aligned to keep you healthy and do smart elements that keep you from developing type 2 diabetes or needing the stent or bypass, etc. So that's sort of a meta theme. Another meta trend is where's healthcare happening? Traditionally it's in the Stanford ICU and hospital, but the pressures are to get folks out of the hospital sooner, not to keep them from coming back. And healthcare is transitioning to less skilled facilities and increasingly to our homes, and technology is enabling that to come even to our own bodies. So a lot of incentives and pressures are to keep people out of the hospital, especially with the reimbursement models today. All right, so it's an exciting time, I think, in healthcare, and part of that is because technology is really, in some cases, speeding up. And I'll just introduce the concept briefly of exponential trends. I think most of you remember your math, you know what exponentials are, but our brains, which developed on the Africa savannas, millions of years ago, tend to think linearly. So if I take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, until 30, I'll get to the DLA Piper at the end of the room. But if I take 30 exponential steps, doubling, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 46, I can't do my math now. You get the idea. How at 15 steps, I'm at about 30,000 steps. That's okay, that's all right. How many steps am I at 15 later, 30 steps? Any mathematicians here? And 1 billion, right? That's 26 times around the planet. And that's happening in multiple fields. Most of you here are familiar with Moore's Law. That's why, with this doubling in computer power, the smartphones in your pocket have, about 1 billion times the price and speed and performance of the best supercomputers at MIT in the 1970s. Your iPads are as powerful as a Cray supercomputer from the late 80s. So incredible power with exponentials, and that often creates stress and opportunity. If you're not paying attention to whatever field you're in, you could be disrupted. And one of the famous examples of that would be Kodak. They had their Kodak moment, right? They actually invented digital photography. They had all the original patents on it. What do? They kind of didn't pay. They said, "Oh, we don't want to cut into our film business." And a year ago, Instagram sold for $1 billion with 10 kids in a garage in Palo Alto, and Kodak was bankrupt. So if you don't pay attention to the exponential pace of trends, you might be disrupted. So the opportunity is to disruptor be the disruptor. And it's not just obviously IT and mobile, it's a lot of fields that are getting fast, cheap, smaller, more accessible, some cases dissolving into our phones where this convergence happens. And that's where I think it's exciting to let us reinvent fields. Like arguably, Amazon is self-disrupted. They now sell more ebooks than regular books, and they kind of help create the Kindle and beyond. So that's disruption. You've seen, when was the last time you went to a Blockbuster, right? Now, that wasn't that long ago. Right now you can stream all these movies, and that's pretty incredible. That was obviously disruptive for Blockbuster. I think they're out of, and then this is the example of film, how you go to travel agencies. Uber is disrupting taxi services. What will be the Uber of healthcare? It takes something relatively kludgy and complex and makes it elegant and fun. Everyone here use Uber? If you haven't tried it, right? So that's an example of where things could kind of go pretty quickly. So let's look at some fast-moving technology trends. So human genome, right? It's not a big secret that the price of sequencing a genome has dropped at twice the rate of Moore's law. So about 2001, the first genome was done. It took $1 billion, 7 years. Then it was $100 million, and now it's dropping down to the point where, depending on how you price it, about $2,000 to $4,000 for a genome. Has anyone here been tested at all? 23andMe? Anybody? Right. It's now $99. I mean, well, we can talk about the FDA issues, but it's pretty amazing. You can drop your spit in the mail until about a week ago, and get about 1.5 million base pairs analyzed. And I actually helped Ann Wojcicki and Linda get that started in 2006. But it's pretty incredible the power of this, whether you agree with the FDA policies or not. And it won't just be SNPs, it's going to be your whole genome pretty soon. I had my exome done for $1,000 about a year ago. If I brought that to my primary care doctor, they don't know what to do with your exome or your genome. So there's the question of what do we do with all this information? Some of it we can even do on USB chips at the point of care, the field of pharmacogenomics, your genes and how they affect what drug you should take. So it's all getting cheaper and more accessible to the point where you literally, and this is my friend Raymond, the chair of the biotech track at Singularity U, his genome's on a disk drive, and I prescribed it and it arrived in the mail. The challenge is what do we do with this? But it has huge opportunities moving downstream. And of course, it's not just your genome that's getting cheaper, it's the proteome. I mean, normally if you get a blood test, you might get 20 chemistries analyzed, but with proteomics you can measure thousands or tens of thousands of markers from your blood. We don't know what each one of those spots are necessarily, what they mean, but soon we might. Environmental data, the idea of geomedicine. When was the last time your doctor asked you where you lived? I mean, if you grew up in the heart of New York City or by Love Canal or by 3 Mile Island, you're going to have a different health history than if you grew up in rural Nebraska or in Kuwait. Lots of differences about where you live. Clinical data is getting really incredible, high resolution. Biomarkers you can do at home, we'll talk about. And incredibly, even also your microbiome. The idea that there's more cells in terms of bacteria in your gut than cells in your body, and that's starting to play a major role in healthcare in terms of inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, a disease of Ashkenazis, and even obesity can be affected by the bugs in your gut. So it's not sexy, but we're moving to the realm of fecal transplants. That's a whole other talk, but I'll leave it at that. Faster computing is particularly enabling faster imaging and more high-resolution imaging. So now a surgeon, what used to take days of reconstruction, could be done on the fly on your tablet. So if you're operating on a particular patient, you can understand their anatomy, avoid the blood vessel that you might need to avoid, find the tumor. All done, I guess, with incredibly high-resolution technology initially developed for the movie industry and gaming is being applied to healthcare as we get Moore's law, in our pocket. How about neuroscience? So now, with high-resolution imaging, we can not only appreciate, the amazing basic anatomy of our brain, but now the connectome. And Obama initiated a brain mapping initiative a few months back. But the point is that we can better understand our psychiatric diseases and neurology in general by understanding the wiring of our brains. Psychiatry is still very empiric. We'll try a drug and see if it works 2 months later. We now can image the brain in real time, and in some cases maybe figure out and personalize antidepressants and beyond much more tuned. And in fact, IBM is reverse engineering at the microscale brain anatomy to make the next generation of supercomputers and chips. So a lot's happening in the neuroscience field. Cardiology, another area ripe for disruption. I won't ask anyone if anyone here's had an angiogram, but you're probably familiar with the needle up the groin, and now in the cath lab, also radiation, imaging the blood vessels of your heart. Well, how might that get changed and disrupted by technology? Well, one is from a Stanford startup called HeartFlow, where you can now do a 30-second CT scan of the heart, normal CT scan, and now reconstruct your blood vessel, kind of using cloud-based computation, determine how narrow it might be, called the FFR, fractional flow reserve. So this patient has a 40% narrowing, and now you can do that computationally and decide, do they need a stent or not? And if so, what type of stent? Maybe you'll 3D print the stent. And this isn't science fiction, this is doable today. They're now doing trials where they've compared it to the gold standard, the needle up the groin, and the catheter, and it seems to be as effective or better. So that will disrupt your interventional and diagnostic cardiology, just like we'll get rid of the echocardiogram as well. The echo for looking at your heart. This Stanford startup that I advised called Morpheus has developed a way with a 10-minute MRI, not only to do your anatomy, but the flow in your heart and other vessels. So you can get essentially all the data from an echo in 10 minutes, all through cloud-based computation, right back to your cardiologist or to you. So that's the convergence of high-speed computing, mobile, cloud-based informatics, and high-speed computation, reinventing and disrupting fields. So let's go to something that's a little more in our hands and pockets. So, remember when Michael Douglas was walking on the beach in Wall Street Movie 1? He's on a cell phone, oh my God, right? I was on the way to Dubai watching the movie the movie about Steve Jobs, and what shocked me was the opening of the movie, if you've seen it. It's an okay movie. He's waving around the first iPod. Anyone remember what year that was?
2001.
2001. I was like, that's only 2001. I moved back here in 2000. Like, oh my God. And and that was like, it had 1,000 songs on it, right? Wow. And we forget that, the iPhone and Android have only been around for 5 years, or 2006. And iPads have only been out for 3.5 years. So, a lot is changing, and these are becoming medical devices, essentially. The fact that every medical student at Stanford now gets an iPad loaded up with a curriculum at first day of school is changing the way the digital natives interact with information and how patients do as well. What would you guess? Anyone who knows the answer, don't tell me. I've got in my pocket the world's cheapest Android tablet from India, called the Akash tablet. How much is it? Royce is right. 200.
45.
45.
99.
99. Price is right. $35. Now it's, you win this. I mean, for $35, I can give them away, right? It's cheaper than an X-ray, a blood test, and it's not as fast as a Samsung Galaxy, but soon it will be equivalent. So this is going to democratize education around the world, healthcare, where every nurse in a remote village has this, and we have, Google Loon beaming data down. So, and again, this isn't the perfect fastest tablet, but it works on Android pretty well. And it's going to be quite, I think, impactful. So what do we do with all this mobile? I think one of the biggest takeaways is it provides us dashboards into our data. So diabetes, big problem, both type 1 and type 2. How does it normally happen? If you're diabetic, you might record your blood sugar on your little piece of paper and fax it to your doctor or bring it in occasionally. But now you can have a glucometer attached to your smartphone. You can actually go to the Apple Store now and on University Avenue buy a glucometer on the shelf, right? And as a diabetic, if you have information and you can see that data, you can see the trends, you can modulate that potentially, or your clinician can. And you don't even need a fancy connected glucometer. This company called WellDoc, a startup that was just acquired for I think 150 million, created a little game so diabetics would record their blood sugar on their phone from their normal, Omron glucometer or whatever. That number will go to their primary care doctor. The primary care doctor would then go, okay, let me change their metformin or their glucophage. And what happened? Their hemoglobin A1C, which is an average measure of glucose, went down by 2 percentage points, which is bigger than any blockbuster drug, right? It's a huge, huge change. And that's just with an app, right? That's just with a feedback loop. So I think there's going to be lots of examples of using mobile for things like diabetes, to exercise. The group here that had the mobile, sustained their weight loss for a longer period of time with just a simple feedback loop on their app. We're going to see examples already are of I'll prescribe you an app. I'll give you the tablet with the app on it. It might be an app for pregnancy, which hasn't changed in a long time, or it might be an app before you have your colonoscopy or after your surgery to help optimize your information. So lots of opportunities to create smart feedback loops that are personalized. In fact, there's now appified versions of ZocDoc, a company valued over $1 billion, started by a friend of mine in New York. And essentially it's an open table for making a doctor's appointment. You can try it locally. You need a dermatologist tomorrow at 3 o'clock, see who's available down the street and see how they're rated. So that's taking old models like Open Table and medicalizing it. People are doing that for Yelp with vitals.com to rate your doctor. All sorts of examples can be taken from other worlds in transition. This is just one good example that's growing very, very fast. All right. The new drug is not really necessarily the app or a new device or drug. It's you. It's the patient. It's the engaged patient. It's you feeling responsible for your own health, not that it's Dr. Kraft or your primary care doc is supposed to be in charge of it. So part of that's making, for some people, using gaming elements, instead of Farmville, maybe play Healthville, or potentially like we did at Packard Children's, where I did my fellowships in hematology oncology, we'd take the kids, mostly teenagers, and they played a game called Remission, and they would shoot their tumor and raise their white blood cell counts, and what happened, the teenagers would stay more on top of their home medicines, which might save some of their lives. Or we could take, you've all seen Microsoft Connect, make that into a gaming element. If anyone here's done physical therapy and hasn't done their physical therapy like they were told to, what if you have the Connect and it's attached to your new game box or what have you, and it's going to influence you to do your physical therapy and measure your progress and give you points and modify it based on you as opposed to just some piece of paper your physical therapist gave you. And that's with low cost, amazing technology came out of Israel, right? And a lot of it was just acquired by Apple, I think, right? Somebody tell me? Yeah, so the way we interact with our environment and these sort of tools that were not made for medicine are moving there, right? And if any of you've seen, I met the two guys when they came to San Francisco, Leap Motion, another example that's going to disrupt Connect, where you can measure little micro movements right from a small matchbox size of thing connected on your computer. So lots of elements like this. We've been talking and connecting this company to like GE, so radiologists might use this to interact in the operating room and beyond. So lots of potential there. Okay, so part of this theme then is that healthcare is becoming digital with sort of Moore's law and all this data coming out from vital signs and beyond. We're sort of digitizing our healthcare. Medical records are about 50% electronic today. A lot of challenges there, but it provides a really interesting opportunity to pull out the data together, particularly when we're talking in the mobile realm. So, like a field like dermatology, do you really, that little funny looking mole, do you think it's a melanoma? Well, what if you take a picture of it, and you can now crowdsource a bunch of dermatologists to tell you whether that's a melanoma or not, or maybe there's an artificial intelligence agent that's going to read the lesion and figure out, at least give you some guidance whether it's low risk or high risk. And if it's high risk, you can press a button and make an appointment with a dermatologist in Palo Alto the next day for biopsy. So there's several apps that do a reasonably good job of that. So eyes, at MIT Media Lab, there's a thing called iNetra. They'll do basic eye diagnostics. Their first market's India, where there's very few optometrists. And their business models, you get the prescription, you press the button, and your eyeglasses get shipped to you. Those of you with small kids that have otitis media, ear infections, this company now has a way of looking in your ear and sending the photos and video right to your pediatrician. Yeah. Right? And it's just a pretty simple attachment, but do you want to go drive your screaming 3-year-old in to look in their ear for 10 seconds? That can be done remotely. Now, is that pediatrician going to get paid for it? Most doctors don't get paid to do email today, so if the incentives is, that might work well on a Kaiser or VA, and it may not work well at Palo Alto Medical Foundation, but that's available essentially today. I mentioned diabetes. How about the heart? So this is a company called AliveCore, probably one of the leading early digital health companies, but my friend Dr. Dave Albert, who is a cardiologist and invented, I'm going to pull up on my phone here, this EKG case. This is a case on the back of a phone. There's now one for almost any phone. So I'm going to put this down for a second, and I'll do my live EKG. We can pass this around and do a screening. Hold on. So you'll see here, it's going to record my EKG. It's live. My heart rate's only 107. All right, 106. I need some caffeine. So this is recorded here. And what's interesting about this is this can be sent to anybody in the world. If you're a patient with atrial fibrillation, for example, where your heart rhythm goes in and out of a proper rhythm, this could be used to diagnose. I've used this when someone collapsed at a conference once on an airplane. There's been lots of stories about these used locally. Whether you're a triage nurse or you're the patient yourself, this is going to change the way we look at this information. What's changed last week, 2 weeks ago? There's now a way where I can record this EKG, and I hit the button here, EKG analysis, and 5 minutes later, I have my EKG available. I got the little text in, and I can look at my actual EKG with an actual interpretation from a board-certified cardiologist if I want to pay the $12, or like $5 if it's from a technician. So this is just an example of one piece of important data that might change the way you do screen. I pass this around the room. I promise you, someone here has got some funny heart block or something. We've done this before, so I guess knowing which one of you it is. But this could be a screening tool, or again something you would have on your own device. All right, and you can buy this now with a prescription for about $199. Soon it'll be over the counter. So
is that application a class 1 classified?
They got it through the FDA, approved the FDA as long as they'd sold it with a prescription from a physician. I don't know whether it fits in a class 1 or 2 or what, if they had some element. A lot of the FDA is struggling. How do they regulate apps and how do they regulate devices? It's one thing if it's something tracking your steps.
Guess what? They don't know.
And they don't, but they've just come out with some guidance, so I can't tell you all of it, but it's different if it's a step counter or if it's one telling you how much insulin to take. I mean, there's a lot of difference on how valid that information needs to be. But to their credit, the FDA is trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of change in that realm. All right. So, how many folks here have done quantified self? Who has a Fitbit?
What?
Who has any kind of device to track their activity? I'm wearing like 6 of them. 6 of them, right? So, have you all heard of the quantified self movement? So, if you can record elements of yourself, that might be really, really useful. So, I'll give a few examples here. Let's see. There's connected health scales. How many of you want to tweet your weight every day if you're on a diet? Right? This is the first device really that made the market was the Fitbit, but now there's like 6 different ones that I'm wearing that are available. This is one called the Basis Watch. So it records my heart rate live with a little sensor, and my steps, and my calories, and how far I've walked, all available on my watch, but also connects to a dashboard. And that could be used now for running a triathlon, but I could use this to track a patient who's on a beta blocker and watch their heart rate, for example. This is actually my data. So putting that together, heart rate data, steps data, sort of horse sensors 1.0, or sort of the Fitbit, this is like 2.0. And there's a whole set of these, right? Anyone want to change their diet and have a fork? Wow. A happy fork? It tracks your eating. Happy fork. All right. I mean, I haven't tried this yet. I just got it. But maybe just even having the mindfulness element of having this fork will do it, whether it's connected or not. And part of what these things do is, those of you who know psychology, the Hawthorne effect. If you think you're being watched, or you have something being watched, it changes elements like hypertension. I bet you, if you average, 1 in 3 of you in this room have high blood pressure, at least that's the US average, but half of Americans who have hypertension don't have it controlled. And what does that mean? You have more strokes, more heart attacks, all those things that are downstream from hypertension. What if you now have a connected blood pressure cuff like this one, which you can also get at the Apple Store, and have a feedback loop on your blood pressure? And ideally, your doctor, and they've just published this in JAMA, when they can see that number and adjust it, then they're incentivized. Like, I'll get a bonus at the end of the year if my patients have good blood pressure. They might change behavior across the system. So that's a bit of quantified self, which is moving to even more invisible elements. This company, MC10 out of Boston, has made conformal, stretchy electronics, which you can make into a tattoo. And their first product's actually in Reebok on a thing called check light, so when kids are playing football, when they're getting concussions or when they're about to. So lots of different ways of measuring technology. And I'm wearing right now a patch. Let me see if I can log into the website. I can show you my live streaming EKG. I can't do this and hold the mic at the same time. So right now, I'll just do the demo from here. Right now, I'm wearing that patch, it's talking to the cloud. It's going to my phone. And without touching my phone, essentially, let's see, I can only find the app out of too many apps. It's talking to my phone, and here it has my, I'm out of memory. Error writing data file. Well, okay. Here it's showing my live heart rate. You're sort of seeing a version of what this would look like. If you can see it from far away, there's my EKG on my phone, right? And that can be set anywhere, real time, anywhere in the world, including my stress level, which right now is let's see, 96%. Gosh, guys, you're stressing me out. My posture, how many steps I've taken, my respiratory rate, my posture showing there, showing here if I fell down and I didn't get up, it could send an alert to 911 or my mom, you know. They can try my activity or my ski. So all these things are now on a $2 essentially disposable patch. A local company called Vital Connect. They might be hiring, I don't know. But you know, this is big data. Now what do you do with this is the next question. If I'm your doctor and I give you this, do I want to be responsible for watching this 24/7? No. So part of the challenge is how do we leverage and understand this?
Do you interpret those yourself?
Yeah, the basics, sure. I can say if I'm in normal sinus rhythm, or if I'm tachycardic, or if I'm in VTach, or something. Yeah. And if I press the emergency button, I'm your primary care doc. Maybe I can see that in real time. The trick is, who's liable for it if I'm missing the EKG, right? You know, Google's self-driving car has driven like 1 million miles safer than any of us. But one day, when these get out there, someone's going to get killed by a Google self-driving car. Who do you sue? Google or the driver who owns the car? Similarly, if you've got this EKG case and you're sending me an EKG, who's responsible for it? So there's new questions about all this big data. And a lot of these things are, again, you know, coming to what I'll call the digital doctor's bag. So somewhere in my pocket, yeah, I have, like, for example, a pulse oximeter that plugs into my smartphone. Do you know that little red light that beeps and shows you how well you're oxygenated? There's a whole set of new technologies that can enhance clinical diagnostics wherever you are. You can check out smartphonephysical.org. And the question is, I get asked, you know, which one of these do you get? One of these 6 ones, right? And if you go to the Apple Store again, there's a whole bunch of them on the shelf. So, being an entrepreneur, this summer I co-founded a company called Bionic Health, and it's the world's first connected health pharmacy. And so essentially you can go there and find and compare all the different step monitors, blood pressure cuffs, scales, everything that's sort of generally available, and buy it. We're also enabling that for physicians, so you could have I could prescribe you a device, essentially. Some of you might have back pain and not know that there's a device developed by a Palo Alto company called LumaBack. It tracks your posture, which mine isn't very good. And when you're out of posture and you set it right, it buzzes your back to make you sit up straight. So it's like your virtual mom, sit up straight. But that can help, you know, your respiratory status, also track your steps. This is just one example. You can find, and ideally, I could prescribe you exercise or a device like this and help you stay on top of things. And ideally, your insurance companies will start to pay for it. Because if I say, you know, I want you to walk 10,000 steps a day and get 7 hours of sleep, I'm going to know you might actually do it. And maybe eventually, like progressive car insurance, you might get a lower premium if you behave in the right ways. Big Brother's coming. So it's called Bionic Health. We're doing seed round right now and looking to hire great people. And if you want to try it, it's still in alpha mode. We're going to launch it at CES. Go to bionichealth.com and use the code Bionic with a lowercase and the number 1, and you get $15 and try it. We'd love your feedback. So that's one. All right. Okay. So where else is this going? It's not just, you know, the vital sign data. How about lab data? You know, traditionally you send labs off to Quest. There's a local company called Theranos that's disrupting that. It's going to have these little low-cost tests in every Walgreens. Part of that's being done through microfluidics. Steve Quake's lab at Stanford and others have developed ways to take a microliter of blood instead of a milliliter of blood, put it on a chip, and basically do fast, low-cost diagnostics from everything from HIV to proteomics. And a company I'll mention a little bit more later, Scanadu, is doing smart ways to, let's say, measure your urine. Instead of dipping it and looking at that little strip, now you take a picture of that with your smartphone and do the analytics through your app. Or, you know, if it's flu season, which it is now, and you have a cat cough, you want to go to the clinic and get everybody infected, maybe you spit in this, and it measures whether you have, you know, strep throat or influenza or a common cold, and lets you and your doctor know. And they're about to pilot this locally soon as well. So point of care diagnostics is going to change things. And some of these labs can even be printed, right? And again, analyzed with your smartphone. So the ability to do low-cost elements with smart design and smart integration is coming.
What's driving point of care?
Well, what's driving point of care is if you, again, the example of being a diabetic, or you have a clinic where normally it would cost $100 to ship it to a central lab, and you can get that data there and take action on it and pick up something early. Or if it's a disease that needs modulation based on blood levels for a drug like digoxin or anti-epileptic drug or others, that makes things much more efficient. Some of you might have been a blood thinner. You have to go get your blood, how thin your blood is. You can do that at home and send it in and adjust it. Great. So this idea of a digital checkup could lower costs, improve outcomes, and now that's being tied to the world of telemedicine, and there's like 4 or 5 companies I know of, which let you pay from $12 to $40 and connect with a doctor like with FaceTime. So would you rather spend half a day off from work, or would you like the 10-minute consult with your doc or somebody who's competent online? So that's all coming and changing the way we're going to interact, and we'll take somebody who would normally, in some cases, want to sort of age in place, as the term, or avoid going to a relative nursing home or beyond, and keep them healthier, more connected at home. And where this will sort of, that's where sort of the impetus is, smarter connected healthcare, not to overwhelm physicians or patients. So again, the theme here is that it's not any one technology, it's the layering of all these things. You've probably heard the idea of the Internet of Things. It's no one piece, it's how you put it together in smart ways that I think is going to be impactful. So let's look at a few examples of that. So pacemakers. The new pacemakers are getting smaller. They can be implanted by even a relatively unskilled physician. And by the way, they have apps for them. The newest pacemakers, over 100,000 pacemakers and implantable defibrillators that have IP addresses. So what does that mean if you're Dick Cheney? That might have been a good thing if someone hacked his pacemaker, but now your pacemaker can get hacked, maybe your insulin pump. There's a dark side to all this, but yeah, so there's, the fact that we're having connected devices in our bodies is getting pretty interesting. That also means there's a lot of data generated from these. This is my friend Hugo, who has an implantable defibrillator from Medtronic, and they wouldn't give him his own data. Who owns the data from your actual device? Is it the Medtronic company, or is it you? What if you want to share that information? Who owns it? So there's other bigger questions at play as well. Now, we've talked about digitization, electronic medical records. How about the poor doctor, let alone the poor patient, who's overwhelmed already with the paper record or the stuff that's already existing, and the number of publications keep going up. There's a new regulation on what you do with statins and how to manage, hypocalcemia. All sorts of things change, but the average U.S. doctor only reads journals like 3 to 4 hours a month. So there's no way to keep on top of the changes in medicine. So it's getting very complex, and what used to be simple, you all need a statin, let's say. I would all pick 40 milligrams of Lipitor, because that's what the drug rep left in my drawer, and that's all I have and that's all I know. But now, based on each of your activity, weight, renal function, how much red wine you drink, your genetics, I might need to pick a different statin, and I need some help making that decision. So what's going to help us? Dr. Watson, right? Artificial intelligence, which is very threatening to doctors. My friend Vinod Khosla likes to say 80% of doctors could be replaced by AI and beyond, because what do you call the 50% of doctors are below average? So I like to call it not AI, but IA, the idea that we're going to be augmenting our skills, not just in medicine, but in any of your fields, are kind of, in some cases, ripe for disruption by artificial intelligence. And that's going to be from doing patient workups to figuring out what antibiotic you might need to take, and the whole system will be informed by this. That 30% of waste that I mentioned can potentially be abrogated by smart analytics and understanding this information across the spectrum and applying it at the point of care. So where does this take us? You've got all these Internet of Things, all this data coming at you. What do we really need? In some ways, it's like your own personal check engine light, right? Just like your cars. You know more about the health of your car. Some of your cars will email you now with reports and tell you when to go in. When your oil is low, you get a check engine light or equivalent. What if we could do that for our own bodies based on our data that's really personalized to us? Because you don't really care about the temperature in piston number 3. You care about your check engine light and the idea of maybe having an OnStar for your own body. Oh no!
Uh-oh.
IT disaster. That doesn't look good. Time for Q&A. The blue screen of death? Wow. All right, we're going to recover here in a second. Okay. The battery, that's what's going on. The battery's plugged in. Maybe the whole thing just died on me. Let's see. I have 6% left, but the power cord isn't working, and I just unplugged it. All right, not good. Let's try this again. Can we try one other plug? Thanks. Anyone have any questions or comments while we're dancing? Here we go. So we're over here, yeah, and then over here. Go ahead.
What made Steve Jobs a success was his ability to see technology and how it could be used by average people.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly since we have an aging population,
Right.
the older people. How does a company that has some of these technologies appeal to the ability for the average person to be able to use.
Absolutely. So technology for technology's sake is fine. There were, personal computers before Apple, and it's a matter, I'll mention this in a little bit about design thinking and integrating and smart user interface and making it engaging and not overwhelming and making it sort of, in some cases, plug and play. So I mentioned all those devices that are in the home, the digital checkup. Qualcomm, which makes chips that most of you have on your phone, has a new spin-out called Qualcomm Life. And they've now created essentially, this is basically a cell phone. So if I sent you home and you had a complex problem after surgery or what have you, I'd send you home with this, you plug it in your wall, all the devices I send you home with start to talk to it seamlessly and send data back to me. So that's simple user interface in a sense. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But
CEO of Qualcomm went to my university.
excellent, yeah, they're a good family. One more over here.
So I work with Robert Bosch Healthcare, which is a former health bureau.
Yep.
And we've been hearing about this for over a decade.
Yeah, it's not new, yeah.
And so, and there's always this talk about explosive growth, and we're all still waiting for this in telehealth. And what is going to make this happen?
I think it's a bit of it needs the perfect part of this aligning storm of incentives, aging population, the fact that, and I know Steve Brown and quite well from TED and beyond, and they did the first version of a feedback loop for heart failure and could show that you could lower heart failure admissions dramatically. But their boxes haven't, and you Bosch, I don't know if you guys have evolved it that much, but now you can get leapfrogged by a tablet that does the same thing and a sensor that is $2. So, and it's a question of who's going to pay for that still. Is it the VA going to? And others. So in some silos, like heart failure, is starting to happen because now Stanford won't get paid if you come back to the hospital within a month of your heart failure discharge. So some of those things have to align in order for some of these technologies to align. Again, it's reimbursement-based medicine, not evidence-based medicine, and that's starting to shift because some of these things are getting cheaper and more accessible. Not perfect yet, because that solution, as you mentioned, was around several years back, and I'd love to hear what happened to it. Two quick ones, and then we'll keep going.
Let's go, and then we'll
Okay,
have
we'll come
questions
back.
at the end.
How are we doing on time, by the way?
We're okay. We're good.
7:51, right? Okay, let me speed up a little bit. All right. Tricorder fans here, anyone? Trekkies? Sorry, okay. We have a few Trekkie here fans. So what's happening with the equivalent of a real tricorder? You can now get for $4,000, what used to be a $100,000 ultrasound that fits in your pocket, right? And you can Facebook your ultrasound right away. It'll be fun, right? And where's that going? In reality, like when we talk about incentives, I've been involved with the X Prize. You remember Spaceship One? There's been other X Prizes to develop one to make a medical tricorder. And Qualcomm is actually the sponsor. $10 million prize. There's been over 300 companies have entered this competition. And that's pulling the things together to create home-based technologies like that are equivalent to a tricorder. So if you have a device like this company Scanadu, you hold it to your forehead and it speaks to your smartphone with all your vital signs, that might be useful in doing triage and diagnostics and beyond. And this is actually, I've got a working version in my pocket, will measure heart rate, temperature, oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, blood pressure, relative EKG, maybe even your stress level. And that can be transformative together, and here's what it looks like when it talks to your phone. That data will come in, and hopefully we'll learn how to make sense of that. And as your doctor or as your Dr. Watson on your phone can start to leverage this. So as you mentioned, someone was actually about, is this technology going to be used? I introduced Scanadu to IDEO, the design firm up the road out of Stanford, and we made this movie to look at, I need sound. We have sound?
Your mic.
Oh, smart, okay. This is a little video made by IDEO about a year ago, looking at where this might be in a couple years when we pull all this together. Take a look and a listen.
Technology has given us an unprecedented window into the human body. But on a day-to-day basis, we're still in the dark about our own health. We are changing that. What if instead of fearing the worst when you notice something out of the ordinary, you could identify the condition yourself? Getting the right diagnosis would save you worry. He says it's roseola. And an unnecessary doctor's visit. Press the home, it's okay.
No problem.
Instead of hearing about a viral outbreak on the news, imagine you got an alert. It was tailored to your family's needs. It would also give you advice about what to do next. What if you had a way to identify what was wrong right away? Since it's 103.8. A way to get all of the information you need to understand the situation. And serious cases, you would know when and where to seek help. We're building a way for people to check their bodies as often as they check their email. It's all possible, and it's only the beginning.
The average American checks their email 150 times a day, so that could be a problem. But that's not science fiction. That's pulling these things that are sort of here together and integrating them in smart ways. And in fact, Xanadu broke the record on Indiegogo for crowdfunding for like $1.5 million worth of these are going to go out with the cooperation of the FDA sometime mid next year. So that will be a game changer and change the way we have connected health. One quick.
What do you mean by with
The FDA is looking so that once this gets approved, or is out there, that it actually is being regulated in some sort of way and it can be sold. So they're not just willy-nilly going out there. One of the critiques about, let's say, 23andMe is they didn't play ball with the FDA, potentially. At least they're trying to play with ball in a forward-acting thing. And to their credit, the FDA is trying to think about how do you regulate the tricorder of the near future to sort of enable better connected health, right? Because healthcare is really about our social networks in more ways than just our genetics. The influence of our genes, our relationships, affect obesity, our smoking, our depression, all sorts of things are tied to social networks. So we need to start leveraging those in smart ways because our behaviors that come from our social networks as well are more impactful than our genetics. So to take the example of diabetes again, what if you could take folks who are pre-diabetic, about to go diabetic, and you put them in a social network, you give them a connected health scale, you could recapitulate was a well-worn way of doing this in the old school way and digitize it, and they've been able to demonstrate that folks who are in these programs dramatically turn the corner overall and don't go on to become diabetic. That saves potentially a lot of money, also saves a lot of bad health, right? And I was just in Abu Dhabi, and Adrian, who's here, has instituted or put together a program where you might, depending on the population, make something that relates to the kids. In this case, her camel, Shasha, which is a famous camel, and maybe kids will relate to that and exercise. So you have to put it in context and in the social realm as well. Now, part of that means getting insight. What if you look in the mirror every morning and you see healthy you? What's going to happen if you stay on your diet? Or what happens if you don't, right? That's going to be impactful to some of our ways of thinking. You don't need to wait for the magic mirror. You can download an app. This one's called Fatify. Here's me now, and here's me like 1,000 falafels later. Boom. I'm going to change my behavior. I do a little bit now, right? I don't add sugar to my coffee, right? Or what if you have a young smoker, a woman who, a lot of Israelis smoke? What if you show them what they're going to look like if they keep smoking 2 packs a day in a decade? Or if you spend too much time on Facebook, right? Different ways of leveraging information can be powerful, right? We can do not just connected medicine through apps, but robotics. There's a new generation of robots that are able to do rounds in the hospital. We're seeing low-cost versions of these to enable the head of our faculty at Singularity U, and they went to Fry's Electronics. They have a Skype on wheels. It's now $1,200, so you can visit and go rounding. We're seeing robots used in all sorts of realms, everything from camel racing, which is where I just came from, to enabling the disabled, so really powerful ways to enable the disabled, including especially impactful for those who have severe disabilities. I'm going to move this forward. So my colleagues at Brown University, my alma mater, developed now BCI, so a woman who's completely quadriplegic can feed herself just by thinking in this case. So that was real groundbreaking work about a year ago. And that's going to eventually change the way the disabled interact with the environment, brain-computer interface. Brain-computer interface can also be just from a headset you wear, not an implant on the brain. There's several versions now for $100 to $200, and you can take a kid with attention deficit disorder and get them learning to focus and get them off of Ritalin, or use them to get folks to do meditation in a better way. So I might prescribe you a headset and an app to get you to meditate instead of giving you an antidepressant, for example. Robotics are being used for the disabled, not the fully quadriplegic, but the paraplegic. So this is technology out of the military initially. Now a Berkeley company called Exobonics and an Israeli company called Rewalk have developed wearable exoskeletons. And I was in Budapest last month. We have a new version of that, which together with 3D Systems has made a 3D printed version. So the parts are customized to this woman who's actually paralyzed from the waist down. So really interesting integration. And I think some of us when we're 95 years old and might use a walker would strap one of these on and go climb the dish, right? So, but we want to cure spinal cord injury, right? We don't want to just put robotics on. So the future of that is going to be is evolving from this gentleman on my left here, who I met about a year ago, and 2 months later he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Coincidence? I don't know. But he won the Nobel Prize for developing the way to take any of your cells and turn them into your own embryonic stem cells. It's called induced pluripotent stem cells. It's the brave new world of stem cell biology. That's being merged with things like 3D printing now. So I'm wearing a 3D printed metal ring. I've got a 3D printed belt. You can do amazing things with 3D printing. We're starting to back healthcare. To make either hearing aids that match your ear, things for neurosurgery, the next generation prosthetics which match the missing leg. We're seeing the ability now, which you'll see dramatically, to change orthopedics, to make braces that are made exactly to fit you, right, or crutches. You can take a Microsoft Kinect and scan yourself and print yourself on a 3D printer. Here's mini-me, right? Now that's cute, but what if, God forbid, you're a patient with a kind of cancer and you've lost part of your face? You could 3D print a prosthetic that matches. The Bionic Man isn't that far beyond, where we're merging electronics and tissue engineering. And we're at this point now where we can make tracheas and basic things like bladders, but we're moving to 3D printing complex organs in probably the next decade. So a lot's been happening, right? So how do we keep track of all this? How do we leverage, understand technology so that we can reinvent health and medicine? So as I mentioned in the intro, I've been sharing the medicine track for Singularity University since it started 5 years ago. How many people here know what Singularity University is? How many people don't? Fair number, okay. It's 5 years old. We're based at NASA Ames, right down the road. It was co-founded by Peter Diamandis, who started the X Prize, and Ray Kurzweil, who's now the director of engineering for Google. And the idea was to get people out of their silos, to cross-train in medicine, robotics, AI, nanotechnology, space, energy, policy, law, and ethics, and beyond. Each summer, there's Ray and Peter in the first summer, we know 80 students each summer come together and we cross-train and go, where's technology heading? How can we reinvent energy, education, and beyond? And we've had, every summer, at least 4 or 5 incredible Israelis come as well. There's a competition each year to win spots as well. And some amazing innovations have come out, from using drones to deliver drugs and devices, 3 years ahead of Amazon, Other example, there's the drone that went right by there called Matternet. An Israeli-led team this summer developed this company called Blue Box, using DVD players to do laboratory analysis on a DVD without changing much of the system, just changing the disc. A Harvard medical student team developed a way to make a glove that does telemedicine and diagnostics. So there's a few examples that came out of the main summer programs. We also have 1-week executive programs. There's one going on right now. Actually, Chris Anderson is there this week, the curator of TED, and many other amazing folks we have folks from CIA agents to generals to everybody over the spectrum. And I encourage you, if you're interested in coming for a 1-week program and touching on some of these things I touched on very briefly, check out singularity.org. And also this program I started 3 years ago called FutureMed, which is a 1-week, or it was a 6-day, and now we just did a 3-day version of reinventing healthcare, bringing together about half physicians and half folks from all sorts of different spectrums. And we've grown the program to about 400 folks. We just had it last month, the Hotel Dell. There we are in front of the Dell. And what's kind of magical, again, is when you bring folks together from all these different fields and you rethink where medicine can go. And a lot of companies like Xanadu came out of our first program and others. So we're changing the name to Exponential Medicine. Hopefully you can come next year. All right. So the theme there is that other people are coming to healthcare, not just the traditional medical folks. And I think almost anywhere in the room here can contribute to healthcare in some way. And that's where it gets interesting. Even Google, as you know, has just launched a company and is starting to get involved, Calico, in longevity and health. So you don't need to be a doctor to be involved. There's a whole new generation of incubators and accelerators like Rock Health in San Francisco. We need design thinking from Apple and beyond, so we can start implementing these things. That means, if I'm going to fly like I just did, design thinking can go all the way from devices and apps to your furniture, right? Hospital furniture, or reworking, how you have a cane, right? Smart design can make a huge difference. And it means we can take lessons from other fields. So if I'm flying back from Dubai, I don't want to put planes on wings on my plane. I want, ideally, my own Airbus. And of course, it's not enough to have the airplane itself. We need the whole system around it and smart design thinking. So I like to think of lessons from aviation and how we might apply those in healthcare. So we're almost done. I'm going to just kind of cover some kind of lessons from other fields. So one in aviation, here's some fun flying pictures back when I ran the Brown Flying Club, and then I've been in the Air National Guard since '99, first with F-15s and an F-16 squadron. And we even got to fly against the Israelis when they came, and they beat us with their missiles, Python missile. So there's lots of interesting lessons from aviation and the military world we can apply to healthcare. So, for example, checklists, right? It's happened, by the way, that, oops, we cut off the wrong leg, took out the wrong kidney. Big oops, right? simple things like checklists can dramatically lower and improve outcomes. So those have been applied in the operating room. Atul Gawande has a pretty famous book about this, and it's continuing to evolve, you know, everything from the space shuttle to this Israeli company that was initially developing apps for, you know, aviation, is now applying them to personalizing apps for the operating room. Another lesson would be simulation, right? Flying has gotten safer and safer, but we have more and more traffic. Now it's because almost every pilot's training on simulators. Now we're learning to do medical education differently. At Stanford, we have a pretty incredible sim lab where you can not only learn to do a particular procedure, an operation, or what have you, but you can bring the whole team together. And the old way of medicine, for those of you who are docs here, is see one, do one, teach one. Now it's see one and sim one, sim one, sim one till you get it right. So you're not practicing on grandma, you're doing it right. And it's often the team dynamics, right? It's when someone comes into a trauma room, or you have to tell a family member that a loved one's died. All those things can be simulated, and you can learn and film it, just like we do in the aviation world. After we do dogfights, you look at the tapes and learn from each encounter. And that's being applied to healthcare in really impactful ways, right? Other lessons would be the cockpit itself, right? That's the old analog cockpit. That's a U-2 spy plane. Same plane has a new cockpit now. It's glass cockpit. You know, you've seen the glass cockpit. And that means we can take all this big data and shrink it or siphon it to something that's relevant to, in this case, the pilot when they need it. And in fact, Lockheed Martin is even helping design the next generation intensive care units, which are kind of like a high data environment, and using some of the things they've learned from developing the F-22 and beyond. How about having a cockpit for, or a dashboard for your emergency room, or your healthcare system, or your patients, or your employees, you know, for those of you in the business world. You need different information in different environments. So if you're landing in bad weather, you need different data. If you're about to hit a mountain and you don't realize it, you can have what's called bitching Betty yell at you. It says, you know, it's gonna, I turn the sound off. It's gonna remind you you're about to hit a mountain, right? And you need different data if you're in a dogfight than if you're landing, for example. So what are the lessons we could take from that to healthcare? Some of you have, you know, fuel-efficient cars, and you watch your consumption, you adjust your driving, right? Or some of you have seen these things, right? Oh, I'm going over, you change. These things are really effective, especially when they have cameras taking pictures of you. So these feedback loops and data and dashboards can be really effective. So imagine the near future of healthcare is to have your own healthcare GPS that knows you, your situation, where you're in your life path, or managing an acute or chronic disease, and it says, Daniel, go right to the gym, not left to McDonald's. You know? That kind of thing can happen, and to the point where we all need sometimes different interfaces and colors, and we can't be overwhelmed. We don't want to be like, you know, overwhelmed, Starbucks, yeah, you know, with data as well. It needs to be smartly sifted and designed. And this is a company led by 2 Israeli pilots who came to Singularity University 2 summers ago. They developed a sensor to look at fighter pilot blood supply, especially when you're pulling high Gs and can pass out and cause many crashes. And they've now developed that not just for the military, but for the next generation biking helmets. A company's called LifeBeam. And I think in January they'll be shipping these biking helmets with the same sensor, so you can get data about your bike ride and your physiology as you go. So another sort of flying example I'll take into reality. But where this gets interesting is we're changing our ability to have vision, both for prosthetics. Two companies were FDA approved this year for visual prosthetics, kind of chips that can fit on the back of the retina. But, you know, what if we can just enable those of us who are lucky enough to see normally? The idea of an assisted living contact lenses have been developed where they can beam the internet to your eyeball. Might be too much information, but what are the implications there? I don't think we need to wait for that era, because obviously we're now in the era of Google Glass, and I have my pair here. Smile. All right, good. So what are the implications of seeing the world differently with glass and beyond? Well, what if you can be wearing contact lenses or glasses and you're exercising? This is an amazing little video made by some Israeli postdocs called Sight. You know, it looks like you're lying from the carpet wiggling your arms, but you're seeing the environment, your virtual environment, and you're flying, right? Or doing something interesting and getting points. Or there's, as the video makes a very, there's the dark side. You can see you're out on a challenging date, right? You need some help, so you bring up the Wingman app. There you go, right? Yeah, she's a tough one, right? Social media's connected, whole 9 yards. So